Introduction to Immanuel Kant's critique of pure reason, of the difference between pure and empirical knowledge. There can be no doubt that all of our knowledge begins with experience. For how should the faculty of knowledge be called into activity if not by objects which affect our senses, and which partly produce representations by themselves, partly rouse the activity of our understanding to compare, to connect, or separate these representations, and thus convert the raw material of our sensible impressions into a knowledge of objects which we call experience. With respect to time, therefore, no knowledge within us is antecedent to experience, and all knowledge begins with experience. But although all our knowledge begins with experience, it does not follow that it arises from experience, for it is quite possible that even our empirical knowledge is a compound of that which we receive through impressions, and of that which our own faculty of knowledge, sensible impressions merely prompting it to do so, supplies from itself. In addition to which we do not distinguish from raw material until long practice has made us attentive to it and rendered us capable of separating one from another. It is therefore a question which at least deserves closer investigation, one that cannot be disposed of at first sight, namely, whether there exists a knowledge that is independent of experience and even of all impressions of the senses. Such knowledge is called a priori, and it is distinguished from empirical knowledge, which has sources a posteriori, that is, an experience. The term a priori, however, is not yet determinate enough to indicate the full meaning of our question, for it is customary to say, even with regard to some knowledge derived from empirical sources, that we might have it or might partake of it a priori because we do not derive it immediately from experience, but from a general rule, a rule which is itself borrowed by us from experience. Thus, one would say of a person who undermined the foundations of his house that he might have known a priori that it would rumble down. Tumble, sorry, Tumblerina princesses, tumble down, that his house would tumble down if he undermined the foundations of his house, that he would have known a priori that if he undermined the foundations of his house, that it would have tumbled down. That is, that he need not have waited for the experience of it actually tumbling down, but still he could not have known this entirely a priori, for he had first to learn it from experience that bodies are heavy and will fall when their supports are taken away. In what follows, therefore, we shall understand a priori knowledge, not knowledge independent of this or that experience, but knowledge absolutely independent of all experience, opposed to it is empirical knowledge, which is possible only a posteriori, that is, through experience. A priori knowledge is called pure, if nothing empirical is mixed in it with it. Thus, the proposition, for example, every alteration has its cause, is an a priori proposition, yet it is not pure, because alteration is a concept which can be derived only from experience. Oh, did I say the title heading? Of the difference between pure and empirical knowledge. Two, we are in possession of certain kinds of A priori knowledge, even if the common understanding is never without them. Here we require a criterion by which we can safely distinguish between pure and empirical knowledge. Now experience is needed. Experience indeed teaches. I need to learn how to read. Cats don't get schooling to read good. Please be patient with me. Why is my Code Red Mountain Dew all the way over there? Did you know that I was drinking Code Red Mountain Dew? I didn't. This is the difference between a priori and a posteriori knowledge. Just kidding. You knew from experience, probably, maybe, that Code Red Mountain Dew existed, and therefore that I may have been drinking Code Red Mountain Dew. Here we require a criteria by which we can safely distinguish between pure and empirical knowledge. Now experience indeed teaches us that something is so or so, but not that it cannot be otherwise. Firstly, if we have a proposition which is thought in conjunction with its own necessity, we have an a priori judgment, and if besides this it is not derived from any proposition except one that it has the validity of the necessary proposition, we have an absolutely a priori judgment. Secondly, experience ever imparts to us judgment, true or strict, but only assumed or comparative universality through induction, so that we ought always to say, so far as we have observed hitherto, there is no exception to this or that rule. If therefore a judgment is thought with strict universality, such that no exception is admitted as possible, it is not derived from experience but is valid. It is absolutely a priori. Empirical universality, therefore, is only an arbitrary extension of validity which applies to most cases to one that applies to all, as for instance in the proposition all bodies are heavy. My body is not heavy, by the way. I'm a cat. No cats are heavy. Have you ever met a heavy cat? Don't answer that. I find that strict universality is essential to a judgment. This always points to a special source of knowledge, namely a faculty of a priori knowledge. Necessity, therefore, and strict universality are such criteria of a priori knowledge and are inseparable from one another. As, however, in the use of these criteria, it is sometimes easier to show the contingency than the empirical limitation of judgments, and as it is sometimes more convincing to show the unlimited universality which we attribute to a judgment than its necessity, it is advisable to use the two criteria separately, each by itself being infallible. Now, it is easy to show that there really exists in our knowledge such necessity and, in the strictest sense, universal and therefore pure a priori judgments. If we want an example from the strictest, if we want an example from the sciences, we need only look at any of the propositions of mathematics. If we want one from the sphere of the ordinary use of the understanding, a proposition such as each alteration must have a cause will serve our purpose. In the latter case, indeed, the very concept of a cause so clearly contains the concept of a necessity of a connection with an effect, and of the strict universality of the rule, that the concept would be altogether lost if we attempted to derive it, as Hume did, from the frequent association of that which happens with that which precedes it, and from a habit arising from this frequent association, therefore from a merely subjective necessity of connecting representations. The awakening from the dogmatic sleep. even without having recourse to such examples in proving the reality of pure a priori principles in our knowledge, it is possible to prove their indispensability for the possibility of the experience itself. So to prove a priori, for instance, for whence should experience take its certainty if all the rules by which it proceeds were always again and again empirical, therefore contingent, and hardly fit to serve as first principles. For the present, however, we may be satisfied to have shown that the pure use of our faculty of knowledge may be a fact, and to have shown what its criteria are. Not only in judgments, however, but even in certain concepts can we show their a priori origin. Remove from your empirical concept a body, everything that stems from experience, one by one, the color, the hardness or softness, the weight, the impenetrability, and there will remain the space which the body now entirely vanished. Just use your imagination. I don't. I have vanished. I vanished. Occupied. And this you cannot remove. The space which the body now entirely vanished occupied, this you cannot remove. And in the same manner, if you remove from your empirical concept any object, corporeal or incorporeal, and all properties which experience has taught you, yet you cannot take away from that that property by which you think the object as a substance or attached to a substance, although this concept of substance is more determinate than that of an object in general, persuaded therefore by the necessity which that concept of substance forces itself upon you, you will have to admit that it has its seat in your faculty of knowledge a priori. 3. Philosophy requires a science that determines the possibility, the principles, and the range of all a priori knowledge. What is still more extraordinary than all preceding is that certain kinds of knowledge leave the field of all possible experiences and seem to expand the range of our judgments beyond all limits of experience. And this, and through this through concepts to which no corresponding object can ever be given an experience. And it is in these very items of knowledge which go beyond the world of the senses, where experience can neither guide nor correct us, that reason carries out its investigations, which, owing to their importance, we consider to be far more excellent, and in their final aim, far more sublime than anything our understanding can learn in the field of appearances. Nay, we should rather dare anything, even at the risk of error, than surrender such investigations, either on the ground of their precariousness or from any feeling of disdain or indifference. These unavoidable problems of pure reason itself are God, freedom, and immortality. The science whose final aim, with all its apparatus, is directed at solely at the solution of these problems is called metaphysics. The procedure is at first dogmatic, i.e., without preceding examination of the capacity or incapacity of reason in it of the without a preceding examination of the capacity or incapacity of reason it engages confidently in so arduously an undertaking. Now it seems natural that as soon as we have left the solid ground of experience, we should not at once proceed to erect an edifice with knowledge which we possess without knowing whence it came, and trusting to principles the origin of which is unknown, not having assured ourselves the safety of the foundation through careful examination. It would seem natural, I say, that we should first of all have asked the question how the understanding could arrive at all this a priori knowledge and what range, validity, and what value it may have. If we take the term natural to mean what justly and reasonably ought to happen, then indeed nothing could be more natural. But if we understand by it what that which ordinarily happens, then on the contrary, nothing is more natural and more intelligible than the fact that this examination should have been neglected for so long. For one part, this knowledge, namely the mathematical, has always been about established trustworthiness, and thus gives rise to a favorable presumption, and also with regard to other parts, though although these may be quite different of a quite different nature. Besides, once we are beyond the pre, precincts of experience, we are certain we are we are certain of not being refuted by experience. The charm of expanding our knowledge is so great that nothing will stop our progress until we encounter a clear contradiction. Such contradictions can be avoided provided that we are cautious in our fabrications, which nevertheless will remain only fabrications. Mathematics provides us with a splendid example of how far we can advance independently of experience with a priori knowledge. It is true that it deals with objects and with knowledge only insofar as they can be exhibited intuition, but this circumstance is easily overlooked because the intuition is in question may itself be given a priori, and it is therefore difficult to distinguish from a mere pure concept. Thus captivated by a splendid proof of the power of reason, the desire to expand our knowledge sees no limits. The light dove parting the light dove parting the air in her easy flight, and feeling its resistance, might come to imagine that flight would be easier still in empty space. It was thus that Pluto left the world of sense, and setting too narrow limits on our understanding, and ventured out beyond it on wings of the ideas in, and into empty space of pure understanding. He did not notice that he was making no progress by means of these endeavors, because he met with no resistance that might serve as a support on which he could test or against which he could apply his powers in order to cause the understanding to advance. It is indeed a common fate of reason, first of all, to finish its speculative edifice as soon as possible, and only afterwards to inquire whether the foundations be well laid. And all sorts of excuses are made in order to assure us of its solidity, or preferably to reject altogether so late and so dangerous an inquiry. But what keeps us free from anxiety and suspicion while we are building and flatters us with an apparent thoroughness is the following. A great, perhaps the greatest portion of the business of our reason consists in analysis of concepts which we already have of objects. This analysis supplies us with a great deal of knowledge, which, though it consists in no more than clarifications and explanations of what is already thought in our concepts, though still in a confused manner, it is yet considered as equal to new insights, and at least in form, even though in matter or content it does not expand the concepts we have, only separates and arranges them, as by the process we gain real a priori knowledge which progresses safely and usefully. It happens that our reason uses this pretense, though without being aware of it, surreptitiously to introduce propositions of a quite different kind, in which it adds to given concepts new and foreign ones, and moreover adds them a priori. Yet it is not known how reason arrived at these concepts. Indeed, such a question is not even so much as considered. I shall therefore, at the very outset, deal with the distinction between these two kinds of knowledge. I shall stop here for now. I hope that you have enjoyed this time with Mr. Kant. I certainly have. Yeah. I want that code red!